Well, welcome to the Unstoppable Freedom Podcast. I'm Jimmy Page. Today, we're going to talk about one of the most important topics of the day, defending the American family. The basic family structure and values are under attack to the extreme, including our government labeling and targeting parents who show up at school board meetings as domestic terrorists. Others think that parents should have exactly no role in the education of their children at all. Well, our guest today, Terry Schilling, he's the president of the American Principles Project. They're dedicated to protecting the American family, representing it in politics, and fighting to both defend parental rights and to promote laws that will allow families to flourish instead of becoming dependent on the government. Terry, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks so much for having me, Jimmy. I'm really excited to be here.
You bet, man. Hey, thanks for making it happen. When you talk about the American family, how do you describe what you're defending, what you're protecting? How do you describe the American family today?
Well, it's obviously, you go around the world and you ask people what a family is, and they're going to tell you the same thing. It's a mom and a dad who have children, and they all love each other and the children unconditionally. And obviously, we live in a very sensitive time, and there are lots of different deviations from that family structure, right? And it's not even all choices, right? Sometimes a father will tragically die. I just lost my father just about a year and a half ago, and I'm the eldest of 10 kids, right? So I think it would be hard for someone to say that because we lost my dad and there's no more dad, that we're not a family. Right. So there are obviously deviations, but when we say that we're fighting for the American family, we're fighting to get back to that ideal. A household where a married mother and father are in love with each other unconditionally, and they're raising their children with that same unconditional love. It's the most stable unit of society. It's what creates prosperity and leads to human flourishing, and that is what we need to get back to. So it's that mom, dad, children aspect that we're really trying to get back to, because that's the one thing that's brought true human flourishing to the world and sustainability.
That's fantastic. I was just thinking, there's no such thing as a perfect family, but there really is a structure that is designed, and I believe as a man of faith that it's designed by God for human flourishing. There is that structure that you just described, and statistically we know that those families that are intact with a mom and a dad in a healthy environment outperform every other type of structure, don't they?
No, that's exactly right. And I've talked to at least a few social scientists, and they all have said, oddly, they've all said the same thing, which is that the data and the research on family structures and how those impact social outcomes are all very boring because of how predictable the data is. They always know that the kids that are raised in a loving household, that with the parents that are married, that go to church on Sunday, they have the lowest crime rates, the lowest suicide rates, lowest depression rates, the highest educational attainment, the most income later on in life, and they're the happiest. And then on the complete opposite of that scale, it's the kids raised in never married households that don't go to church on Sunday. The discrepancies are just so big, and it's so obvious, right? Our founders would say that it is a self-evident truth that the family is the best structure to raise a child under.
That's amazing. And I was just thinking that, why then is the family under attack like never before? I mean, we've seen the family under attack probably since the 1960s, but today I would say that the value for the American family, the value for an intact family is completely under attack. Why is it the centerpiece of attack right now in our culture?
Well, in a weird way, but a sensible way that makes a lot of sense, the family has always come under attack by organizations and activists and regimes that want to consolidate power, right? And it makes sense because if you are a dictator, right, in a country, and you only want people to care about what your edicts are, to care about what you're ordering them to do, family gets in the way of that, right? Because if a dictator is telling you that you need to pay all of your money in taxes to their government so that they can go defeat whatever enemy they want, well, it's kind of hard to do that when you got hungry mouths at home and a wife to take care of or a husband to support. And so the family, at a minimum, is something that needs to be defeated for all tyrants. If you want to consolidate all power, you have to get rid of the family because it's a huge competitor for loyalty.
Wow. And there's strength in a family, right? Because there's, as you said earlier, there's economic strength, there's moral strength. I remember growing up. Do you remember the days when you would grow up in a town with your family and maybe even your grandparents were in that town, and then your kids would go off to school and then they'd come back, and then your family would continue to grow in one area? There is tremendous strength in an extended family. So if we can kind of knock that apart, you're right. The leadership takes more control. It's fascinating.
Yeah. Well, and there was an interesting article a few years ago in the New York Times. I'm totally blanking on the guy's name, but he's a big dog that writes for them. And he wrote an article that caught a lot of eyeballs, and it was called Against the Nuclear Family. And the article's inflammatory if you just read the headline. But when you read into it, what he was actually criticizing is the breakup and the elimination of the extended family. He was basically saying that the nuclear family, just the mom and the dad and the children, it's strong, but it's not enough. You really need that extended family, the aunts, the uncles, the grandparents. And he was noting that in America, we basically eliminated the extended family. You know, the kids move away. They aren't all located. They don't have grandparents to depend on, or aunts and uncles or cousins. It's a really strong point. The extended family, in a lot of ways, is just as important as the nuclear family.
Right. And I was just thinking, my kids are kind of scattered all over the country. We've got California, Arizona, Colorado, Virginia. I mean, it's a mess, but we're very close knit. We're very close knit. And my daughter would ask me, she'd say, hey, if something bad happened, we'd be okay, right? And I'm like, well, of course. Think about this for just a second. We have our family. We've got aunts and uncles who we're close to. We've got grandmas and grandpas. We've got extended family all over the country. We're not the family that's at risk if something happens, economically or whatever it is. We have options. And that speaks to the power of the extended family and the role that it can play.
No, that's right. And the other thing is there's like an accountability thing there too with the extended family, right? When one of your siblings starts doing drugs or whatever, it's usually the cousins that find out about it before the siblings do. And they start to talk, and there's so many benefits to the family, and ultimately it's why it needs, people don't need the government when they have a strong family. It sounds so cliche because we've heard it so much before, but you really don't need government programs for housing or food, or any of this, or education, when you have a strong family that's there to fill in those stopgaps for you temporarily.
It really does solve a lot of the welfare, a lot of the cultural problems that we're facing. And when you see, based upon different communities having different, what I would consider failure rates of the family, when the family fails at a high rate, when the moms and dads don't stay together, you see an unbelievable rise in all of these other things. Well, let me ask you, let's pivot just a little bit and talk about parental rights. Because right now there is a massive battle for parental rights. And the question we're trying to answer is this: who's in charge of the kids? Who has the authority to make decisions for them with respect to medical decisions or gender or a host of other other issues? What are you seeing in this area? What's the battle point for parental rights?
As we've created an economy where moms and dads both have to work to keep their heads above water, they've outsourced more and more of the education, the raising of their kids to the schools. And over the last 20 years or so, there's been this meme that has been popping up from public school officials, which is essentially that kids need a safe environment, because not all kids come from a safe and loving home. And essentially what that's code for is, we're going to raise your kids now. We don't trust the parents. There are too many bad parents out there that can't be trusted. And you first saw this really rising up with the sex ed debate, right? We've always taught reproduction and how, new life is created. But then in the 90s and late 80s, they started teaching safe sex. And basically they were saying, well, parents don't really want to talk to their kids about this issue. They're avoiding it, and so kids are having unsafe sex. So we're going to teach them how to do that. Well, in reality, the schools have no right to teach kids about sex, and it's very simple because parents, it's a much more natural conversation for parents because they literally created that child through their own sexual act. And so the schools really have but I actually tell parents when they bring this up about sex ed in school,
Yeah.
I tell them, you have to talk to your kids about sex, because if you don't, there are people that are very willing to talk to your kids about sex at school, and they're the people you don't want within 500 feet of a school. It's very odd. It's very weird. But so it all kind of centered around the sex ed debate, and now it's morphed into,
Yes.
well, we determine what the truth is. You're a parent. You love America. We get it, but you're just not open to how evil America has been over the years and how oppressive it's been. We're going to teach the real history, as if Americans today, as if American parents don't know how bad the civil rights era was, right? As if we don't know how bad the Civil War era was and slavery was. Like, we fought a civil war over it to end slavery, right? There were a lot of bad things that we've had to overcome as Americans, but there's this real pessimism from our government, from our school officials, that really believe that parents are just a bunch of tools and a bunch of fools, and they have no ability to teach their kids the truth and to get it. And it's just kind of silly, right? Because most of these teachers in schools today are like 23, 24, 25. A lot of them don't even have kids themselves. They have no idea, but they pretend to love our children more than we do. It's really enraging, because I've seen it firsthand in my own public schools. But we just have to beat them. We just have to start tearing back the reins and taking away their power, because that's the only thing they're going to respond to.
Yeah, I agree. I think back to what happened in Virginia when the parents started to realize what was being taught in the Loudoun County School District, which is one of the most liberal school districts in the world, really. We've got plenty of them out here in Colorado, plenty in California, that are really going after our kids in an incredibly predatory way. Most parents don't want their kids, kind of sticking on this sex ed topic. Most parents don't want their kids exposed to pornography. They don't want their kids exposed to other sexually explicit materials in their school, and yet we seem in some ways almost powerless to stop it. What can parents do about getting this garbage out of the curriculum, out of their libraries?
So a couple things, and I think it's a combination of things that are very, it ranges from, being very comfortable doing something to kind of, maybe crossing even some barriers and some boundaries to do the right thing. I think first and foremost, you have to show up at these school board meetings. You have to show up at your school board elections. You have to actually vote. You have to talk to your neighbors, your families, your friends, the other parents that are in your kids' groups. You have to get these books, and you have to show them what's in it. I also think that a lot of these problems that we're seeing are actually coming not just from the local level, they're coming from the federal government through what's known as diversity, inclusion, and equity grants. And what they do is, we've seen this right now with the USDA, the Department of Agriculture, where they say, we're no longer going to give student lunch program money to schools that don't allow boys into girls' locker rooms, don't allow boys into girls' sports. They use that through the Department of Education as well with all of this. So you've got to stand up. I also do think, though, that we need to practice a little bit of civil disobedience, peaceful civil disobedience, obviously. We need to start renting out these books, right, from the library and just not returning them. And just as soon as they pop up, rent it again. Get these books out of the schools, throw them in the trash, don't return them, make them not available, and have your own protests, right? Make sure, do whatever you can to bring more awareness to what these books are. I've read a lot of these books, and I was unprepared. As a 36-year-old male raised in an internet generation, I was unprepared for what's in a lot of these books. I also just think it's about educating yourself, right? You have to know what's in this stuff, and I was even more impassioned to stop this garbage once I actually saw what was going on.
That's the first time I've ever heard anyone recommend rent the books out, check the books out and hang on to them or throw them out. Man, I am so in favor of that. I can't even tell you. That is a tremendous strategy.
Well, you don't have a right to give kids porn, right? You don't have that right. You are violating the law. And you know what? If our founding fathers could throw tea into the Boston Harbor because the taxes were too high on it, we can totally take out child pornography out of our own kids' libraries. That, by the way, we pay for as tax dollars, with our tax dollars. So, I think it's totally justified.
I absolutely love it. I think it's a Tea Party revolution again. I think it's on a much grander scale because our kids, protecting our kids is at stake here. I mean, I've actually seen these books. They are as bad as you can get. You wouldn't check it out. You wouldn't read it as an adult. And yet we're exposing 4-year-olds, 7-year-olds, 10-year-olds to this garbage, this nonsense, and it is searing their consciences. I mean, we have a real moral problem, and parents have to get, I think they have to get engaged at that level.
Yeah, and you know what? I just want to be really clear. You have to check these books out because it's not, it's not those like porny books, those porny novels that your grandma might have, like the Danielle Steele novels.
Right.
This is like gross stuff. It's not
Yes.
romantic. It's not even like, it's weird. It's a sexually weird thing, and they're really trying to make your kids weird. That one book, Genderqueer, it's
Yes.
about a girl who had an abusive childhood, raised by pagan hippies on a commune. Her mom never taught her basic hygiene, never taught her to like keep her hair up, to wear deodorant, about tampon, like all that stuff. Never
Right.
taught her any of that. And basically what this girl's now doing, because she's still hurting and doesn't blame her parents, she blames society for not being weird like them. Now she's trying to force this weird pagan, anti-God, anti-American lifestyle on all of us. And our children. It's totally creepy. It's not, it feels like there should be a worse word than porn for this, because it's way worse than, I would rather my kids come home with Playboy magazine than this stuff, because it's just grotesque and yeah.
It is disgusting. It is disgusting. Hey, listen, let's pivot a little bit more. Same topic, but there's a real battle, a very clear and present battle between allowing biological boys or biological men to compete against biological women, to be in their locker rooms, to be in their bathrooms, and it's putting our young ladies, our girls, at risk, and it's creating an outrageous competitive advantage for men in women's sports. What do we do about this?
Well, we have to change the law, and we have to get new people elected. You have to look at how your school board members are voting, how your state representatives, how your state senators, how your governor. You have to look at how your politicians are voting, and if they're bad on it, even if they're Republican. And by the way, there are a lot of Republicans that are really bad on this stuff too, and it's outrageous. You have to unelect them. You have to hold them accountable. So you have to write to your members that are representing you. You have to vote. You have to get your friends to vote. But you also have to bring awareness to this, right? Like some of the stuff that the left is doing to our kids on this gender stuff, it's so horrific. It's so terrible that people have a hard time believing it, right? So when it's a special interest group in DC, even though we're a special interest group for the family, when it's one of us, they might see our ads, they might hear about it, but they don't necessarily believe it. But they will believe it if their neighbor talks to them, or if their daughter's, friend's mom says something to them and brings it to their attention. So you got to talk to your family and friends about that and get them to the polls. We have to. But the good news is that we're starting to win that fight, right? Just 5 years ago, we were getting our butts kicked on this whole gender nonsense. But then we got involved in the sports, and now the thing is, we kind of lost that bathroom battle in 2016 with Pat McCrory. And what we said was, if we don't stop these, we're going to have sexual assaults. We're going to have invasions of privacy. Our daughters aren't going to feel safe using the restrooms. They're going to have their sports taken away. And unfortunately now, after the craze with the transgender movement has happened, we're now in a position of I told you so, which we never wanted to be in that position. So now we have more momentum on our side. And I'm telling you, the left is freaking out about this. Like the whole transgender activists that are out there, they're very worried about losing this fight. And we just need to keep the pressure up and take this home, because they're on the verge of losing it. The good thing is, vast majority of Americans are with us on this. It's just the mainstream media. It's the people in our elite institutions that are against us. So if we can just ignore all of those losers and keep pushing forward to protect our kids, we'll beat them very quickly.
Yeah, that's really encouraging, actually, because I know I have yet to meet a parent, not even a single parent, who wants their kids exposed to confusing gender nonsense. At where their kids are 5 and 6 year olds and they're being asked what their pronouns are, for goodness sake. We're violating the rules of the English language to come up with this nonsense. I have yet to meet a single parent that wants an adult in any capacity talking to their kids about gender or sexuality. There was a day when this would have been considered criminal, what we're doing. Um, but now here's the problem. Parents are stepping up and they're being labeled and they're being seen as an enemy now, especially in states like Colorado, which have these state laws that make it okay to have these secret conversations with an adult and your child without parental consent. What do we do when the state law is kind of trumps the local desires of the parents?
That's a really great, but also tough question. Again, I think we need to get back to a little bit of civil disobedience. I think that's tricky though, for a couple reasons, right? There's this narrative out there about toxic masculinity, right? And what toxic masculinity is really about is it's not like about going after the guys that are bad men, that are evil, that use their masculinity for bad things. It's about declaring masculinity to be toxic, masculinity in itself to be toxic. And ultimately, why is that bad? Well, that's bad because masculinity is about protecting the vulnerable. Right? That's ultimately, like, if you boil everything down with what it means to be a man, we die for our women and children, right? And when it all hits the fan, we are the self-sacrificing ones. We go out to war, we kill the bad guys so that our kids and our grandkids can have a future life. And they attack that. I do think that dads need to get more engaged in the education fights at the school level. And we need to start confronting these teachers when your kid comes home and they tell you that they learned about transgenderism, that, oh, well, dad, this whole gender thing, boys might be born in the wrong body, actually. They might have been born girls. We have to start confronting these teachers, these principals, and we have to kind of like put our fingers in their chest and say, like, you won't be talking to my kids about this anymore. Yes. And we have to organize other fathers. We really do. And look, maybe you're not comfortable with it, whatever. There will be guys eventually that have their kids be sexually abused in the locker room, right? As we saw in Loudoun County. There's going to be a breaking point where so much devastation is going to happen to certain people's kids, and they're going to start organizing and really putting a lot of pressure back and being civilly disobedient. And I do think we need a little bit more of that. But I do think dads have kind of let the moms fight this out a little bit too much. And I want to see more dads engaged in this fight, because once the dads are involved, it's a real fight. Not that the women aren't doing a good job. They've actually done all the yeoman's work in the research. But I think they'll take it a little bit more seriously when it's not just moms, when dads are also in the fight. I think it does really matter.
Yeah. Well, organizations like Moms for Liberty, for example, have organized across the country. It's like wildfire, man, and I love it. And they're flipping board seats. They're winning. They're throwing out superintendents who have this woke ideology, which is so destructive. They're getting rid of these books out of their libraries. They're really doing a great thing. I can tell you from going to the board meetings here in Colorado, which is one of the most liberal states in the world, no question about it. And I'd say not only America, the world. And you go there, and there's 7 or 8 guys and 50 women. The women are fierce, but you're right. We need another 100 guys to show up and say, not on my watch. My question to you is, at what point do we, especially as people of faith who absolutely cannot go along with this ideology, at what point do we pull our kids en masse? When do we do that?
I think we should have been doing it yesterday, right? I think that by keeping your kids in these public schools, you're propping up a failing system. And look, what we need to realize is that these schools need us a lot more than they than we need them. It'll suck for a few years. You're going to have to make some cuts to your own personal, family's budget. I've had to do it. I'm paying, I think, like $2,000 a month now to send my kids to a private school. It sucks, but you know what? I have to. I don't want my kids being raised in a school that's going to teach them to hate me, hate their country, and hate their creator, right? And that's what these people are doing. They're sending them on a path to hell, and they're making them reject the only people that actually know and love them the most, right? And so you just got to get your kids out. Here's what you need to know. The schools get paid based on how many kids go to that school. So the whole school choice argument is kind of garbage, right? Like when they say like, oh, you just want to take this money away from our schools and put it into the private. It's going to happen anyway if we keep pulling our kids out, because you get paid based on how many kids are in the school, how many days a year. So if we start pulling our kids out and just sucking it up for a few years, these schools will start to collapse. They'll start to fall in on themselves. And our schools, by the way, that are teaching our kids to love their creator, love their country, and respect and honor their parents, they're going to be stronger. We need to stop giving money to Walmart. Stop giving money to these big corporations just because it's easier, right? Stop giving money to the public school. Stop giving your kids' minds and souls to the public school, and build up our local institutions, build up our small businesses, build up our local schools. Things will get a lot better.
It's fantastic. I totally agree. I believe that our educational system has already collapsed, and we keep sending our kids into these burning buildings and thinking they're going to come out without smoky clothes.
No, they're not. Look, the thing that was a turning point for me for why we got our kids out of public school, it wasn't the indoctrination, right? Like, I spend a lot of time, I have a lot of conversations with my kids. If a teacher at the public school tried to tell them that men could have babies, they would literally laugh in their face, right? And they could beat their Democrat teacher in a debate about Ronald Reagan, right? So I pulled my kids out of school out of the public school because they weren't reading. They weren't learning math. They weren't learning science. You know what's funny is my daughter came home, I think it was during Black History Month in third grade, and she said, "Dad, do you know who Mae Jemison is?" I said, "No, and who is that?" And she goes, "She was the first African-American woman in space." And I was like, "Oh, that's so cool. Do you know who Neil Armstrong is, though?" She's like, "No clue." So we sat down, I had to sit down and watch the Apollo series on CNN. And I was like, well, Neil Armstrong was the first human being to go to the moon. So, like, the public schools taught my daughter who Mae Jemison is, which I'm fine with. I think that's great. We should learn about that. But they didn't teach her who Neil Armstrong was, who obviously had a bigger contribution than just being an identity figure, right? Anyway, that's why I pulled my kids out of school. So forget the value stuff. If you just want kids that are not mindless idiots that are addicted to computers and have to rely on that, get your kids into a private good school that's going to teach them how to read, how to write, how to do math, all the basics that schools were basically formed to do in the first place. Because that's the only thing they're not doing. They're doing everything that they weren't started to do, and none of what they were created to do. It's insane.
Right. And it is mind-boggling, the underperformance of the schools. If this was run like a business, we would have changed ownership. We would have changed hands on this. This would have been bought out, and it would be considered like a renovation, like a redo. Hey, we're going to start over on this mess. It's so bad. I was also thinking, we're not teaching our kids critical thinking. All we're doing is teaching them how to memorize things. We're not teaching them virtues. We're not teaching them how to think critically, how to make decisions for themselves. Instead, we're teaching them to be social justice warriors. We're talking about this, as you said, diversity, equity, and inclusion at the expense of excellence. And that's where I have a real problem. Education is about helping our kids strive for excellence in every aspect of their life so that they can be the most productive, moral, principled citizen that they can be so that humans flourish. And now we're dumbing the whole thing down in the name of diversity, equity, and inclusion. It's ridiculous.
Amen, brother. I can't.
Hey, thanks for listening to part 1 of this 2-part podcast with Terry Schilling as we discuss how to defend the American family. Make sure to listen next week, where Terry gives the faith community specific actions to take to defend the family and win the culture war.